Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever had a moment with a stranger that changed your life forever? Today's story begins in the quiet of an old seaside chapel where one simple act of kindness, just a tissue, becomes the first thread in an unexpected love story. Let's begin. The breeze from the sea rustled through the tall pine trees, their branches whispering like an old song meant only for those quiet enough to hear. The narrow dirt path to the old chapel remained undisturbed, moss-covered stones peeking through the ground like nature's forgotten steps. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting a dappled glow over the weathered stone walls, giving the place an almost sacred stillness, like a world apart from the noise just beyond the trees. Sophie Carter drew in a deep breath, the scent of salt and pine resin grounding her in the present. When Sophie Carter turned onto the narrow path leading to the small chapel nestled between towering coastal pines, she had no idea that this quiet afternoon would change the course of her life. She was only looking for a moment of stillness, a pause in the endless noise of town and the crushing weight she carried every day. At 36, Sophie no longer felt young. She worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and part-time at the local library in the evenings, to care for her father, Raymond, who was battling late-stage cancer. Her life was an exhausting loop of shifts, prescriptions, and doctor visits that never seemed to end. This old chapel was the only place in town where she felt she could breathe. Sophie wasn't especially religious, but she believed in silence, the kind of calm that came from stone walls, aged glass windows, and wind whispering through ancient trees. She pushed open the creaky wooden door and stepped inside. No one was there, just as she'd hoped. She slipped off her worn work shoes, sank into the back pew, and closed her eyes. Then she heard it, a soft sound, like someone trying not to cry. Sophie opened her eyes and turned her head toward the front. A man sat hunched over in the first row, shoulders trembling, his face buried in his hands. He wore a dark formal suit, the bow tie undone, the boutonniere on his lapel crushed and wilted. She nearly turned away. This place was supposed to be her escape, but something in the quiet desperation of that moment held her in place. Sophie watched the man for a long moment, her heart tightening in a way she couldn't quite explain. There was a heaviness in his posture, an unmistakable grief that demanded to be seen. She hesitated. This wasn't why she came here. She needed silence, not to console a stranger, but she knew that feeling, the weight of sorrow in solitude, the ache of not being seen. Without thinking much, Sophie reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a tissue. Carrying them had become second nature. Ever since her father started coughing up blood, she'd always kept some close. She stood up and walked quietly down the aisle, her bare feet soft against the cold stone floor. The man didn't notice her approach. Sophie cleared her throat gently. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I thought you might need this." The man looked up as if yanked from a storm of thoughts. His face was puffy and red from crying, his deep blue eyes bloodshot and weary. He stared at the tissue like it was something he didn't quite recognize. "Thank you," he said, voice low and polished, the kind that suggested elite schools and private tutors. Sophie nodded and began to turn away, but something made her pause. There was a rawness in his expression that mirrored a pain she'd once carried herself. "Would you like me to go?" she asked gently, "or would you prefer some company?" The man studied her for a long beat. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Sophie shook her head slightly. "Should I?" A dry, bitter laugh escaped him. "Everyone in this town seems to know, except you." "I guess I'm not up to date on town gossip," Sophie shrugged with a faint smile. The man gave a slight nod. "I'm Lucas Hale." The name didn't register with her, but she didn't let that show. "I'm Sophie Carter." Lucas studied her for a moment, then gestured gently to the pew beside him. "If you've got a few minutes, I wouldn't mind the company." Sophie sat down, keeping a respectful distance. For a while they sat in silence. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic and the steady rhythm of their breathing. Then Lucas spoke. "I was supposed to get married today." Sophie let out a quiet "oh," unsure of what to say. "She left," he said, voice low. 20 minutes before the ceremony. Just ran. His tone wasn't angry, just empty. 300 guests, photographers, a 7-tier cake, and then gone. That must have been a shock, Sophie said softly. The strange thing is, Lucas continued, I'm not hurt that she's gone. I'm hurt that I spent 5 years with someone who never really loved me. Sophie looked at him and nodded slowly. Sometimes what hurts most is the time you can't get back. Lucas turned to her, something in his eyes softening for the first time. That's exactly it. They decided to leave the chapel and walked a few blocks to a quiet little cafe. Lucas was still in his wrinkled tux, Sophie in her faded work clothes. No one gave them a second glance, just two people blending in with the crowd. Over steaming cups of coffee, Lucas shared more about Vivian, his ex-fiancée. Their relationship had always been about appearances, perfect on the outside. I think I knew for a long time, he admitted, but pretending felt easier. Easier than being alone? Sophie asked. Lucas nodded. Exactly that. What about you? Sophie paused. Right now, I'm just trying to keep my dad alive a little longer. That's my whole world at the moment. The next morning, while Sophie was helping her father finish breakfast, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, a delivery man stood there, holding a cheerful bouquet of daisies and sunflowers. Not fancy, just bright and simple. Are you Sophie Carter? The man asked. Yes, I am. These are for you, he said, then turned and left without waiting for a tip. Sophie searched the bouquet for a card but found none. Still, she knew exactly who they were from. Only one person in her life, right now, would send flowers without signing his name. She arranged the bouquet in an old mason jar, the closest thing she had to a vase, and placed it on the kitchen table, where her father could see it from the bed set up in the living room. Secret admirer? Raymond asked, his voice still raspy but livelier than usual. Not so secret, Sophie smiled. I told you about him yesterday, the man I met in the chapel. Well, her father nodded, a glint of amusement in his tired eyes. Sounds like you made quite the impression. Sophie didn't answer, but her fingers brushed over the edge of a white daisy, and her smile said enough. Later that afternoon, while tidying up the living room, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Lucas. He wore jeans and a blue sweater, looking entirely different from the man in the tuxedo. In his hand was a small paper bag. Hi, he said, a little unsure. I was hoping maybe I could see you again, and say hello to your father, too. Lucas sat on the old wooden chair in the living room while Sophie made tea in the tiny kitchen. Afternoon sunlight spilled through the window, casting soft patterns across the floor. A rare, quiet peace. Sophie wasn't sure her father was strong enough for visitors, but when Raymond heard Lucas's voice in the living room, he called out from his bed by the window. Bring him in, sweetheart. Dad, you're tired, Sophie hesitated. Maybe another time. It's all right, he replied with a soft smile. I want to meet the man who made my daughter smile again. Lucas stepped into the modest bedroom, removing his coat, his expression respectful. Good afternoon, Mr. Raymond, he said warmly. I'm Lucas. It's a pleasure to meet you. Raymond sat propped against a few pillows and reached out to shake his hand, his grip weak but steady. You look familiar. Have I seen you on TV or something? Lucas chuckled. That's entirely possible, sir. Sophie stood quietly nearby, watching. She half expected Lucas to seem out of place in her tiny, worn-down apartment with its creaky floors and mismatched furniture. But he didn't. He sat on the folding chair beside the bed and asked Raymond about his hobbies, his past, as if they were old friends. Your daughter told me you used to be the best mechanic in town. Oh, I used to fix every car in this neighborhood, Raymond grinned, his eyes lighting up. Now I just teach folks how to hold a wrench the right way. When I was strong, Raymond said, I never thought there'd come a day I'd need someone to push me around in a wheelchair. I'd be honored to do it, Lucas replied, sincerity ringing in every word. Well then, Raymond smiled, how about this Sunday? If the weather's nice, I'd love to get outside, smell the grass, watch the world move. Lucas looked to Sophie. If you're okay with it, I'll come. Sophie nodded, her throat tight. She wasn't used to people willingly stepping into her world, a world of pill bottles, appointments, and antiseptic. But Lucas didn't hesitate. He didn't just step in, he brought warmth with him. It was a crisp, gentle Sunday. The sun was warm but not harsh. Sophie helped her father into his coat, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and glanced out the window. Lucas stood outside, holding a thick blanket and a thermos in his arms. "You're early," she said with a smile. "Chicken soup?" Lucas lifted the thermos. "My housekeeper's recipe. She swears it cures everything, even broken hearts." They wheeled Raymond outside. The nearby park was only a few blocks away, and the quiet Sunday morning made it feel like they had stepped into a separate world. Lucas pushed the wheelchair while Sophie walked beside them. No one rushed. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft, dappled patterns on the path. Raymond closed his eyes, breathing in deeply, a faint blush returning to his cheeks. "They're staring," Sophie whispered, noticing a few people snapping photos from afar. "I'm used to it," Lucas replied, "but I don't want your dad to become gossip." "Thank you," she said softly. They found a bench near the pond. Lucas gently lifted Raymond from the chair onto the bench, wrapped a blanket around his legs. The three of them sat together, watching the water shimmer in the light. "They think we're a family," Raymond chuckled, nodding toward an elderly couple who smiled warmly at them from across the path. "I don't mind," Lucas said. "I kinda like it." Sophie glanced sideways at him, something soft settling in her chest. So did she. That afternoon, after returning from the park, Lucas stayed a little longer at Sophie's apartment. He helped tidy up after dinner, lingering near the door as if he wasn't quite ready to leave. "You should get some rest," Sophie said gently. "It's been a long day." Lucas nodded, smiling at Raymond in the living room. "It was really nice seeing you again, sir. I hope to come back soon." Then he stepped outside into the still night air, unaware that across the street, behind the glare of a car window, a camera lens was quietly waiting. A single flash would be enough to turn their quiet moment into headlines. The next morning, just as Sophie was pouring coffee, her phone buzzed nonstop, calls, texts all at once. She hadn't made sense of any of it when loud knocks rattled her front door. "Miss Carter, can you comment on your relationship with Lucas Hale?" Sophie rushed to the window. A group of reporters had gathered on the sidewalk, microphones pointed upward, camera flashes flickering like lightning. She flipped on the TV. There it was, an image of Lucas leaving her building the night before. Below it, the headline read, "Dumped billionaire finds new love with unknown waitress." From the other room, Raymond called weakly, "What's going on?" "It's nothing, Dad," Sophie said, trying to sound calm. Just then, her phone rang. It was Lucas. "I'm coming to get you," he said firmly. "Both of you, pack a bag. You can't stay there, not now." The drive took 2 hours, but for Sophie, it felt much longer. She sat in the back seat holding her father's hand, eyes watching the tall trees blur past the windows. Beside them was a man she didn't fully understand, yet couldn't deny her heart was slowly leaning toward him. When the car turned onto a gravel road, Sophie caught her breath. The lake house emerged through the trees. Wooden glass, standing quietly by a still lake, picture perfect in its simplicity and grace. Lucas helped Raymond into a spacious ground floor room, warm, well lit, thoughtfully prepared, with an adjustable bed, barrier-free bathroom, and large windows overlooking the water. Raymond gripped Lucas's hand and nodded. "Thank you, son." Sophie stood in the doorway, silent. She wasn't used to this kind of kindness, especially not when it came without strings, without expectations, from someone who had every reason to walk away, yet chose to stay, someone with wealth, fame, and now gentleness, grounded so deeply in sincerity it unsettled her. That evening, they sat in the kitchen, the warm yellow light casting soft shadows, wind rustling the trees outside. Sophie turned to Lucas, hesitation clouding her gaze. "I don't think I belong here, Lucas." He didn't hesitate. "Maybe you didn't choose my world, Sophie, but I choose you. And if that means walking away from it all to be with you, I will." She was quiet for a long time, then finally, "I love you too, but I'm scared." Lucas leaned forward, gently taking her hand. Then let's be scared together. We'll face it side by side. I'm not going anywhere. Sophie lowered her eyes, blinking back the tears. And in that moment, she realized what frightened her wasn't the life he came from. It was the fact that, for the first time in a very long time, she had something she didn't want to lose. 2 days later, Lucas stood before a crowd of reporters at his family's corporate headquarters. Flashbulbs popped all around him, but this time, he didn't flinch. "Yes, I confirm. I'm in a relationship," he said clearly. "It's not a scandal. It's not a replacement. It's just two people who found something real in an unexpected place." He paused, his tone turning firm. "I ask that you respect the privacy of Sophie Carter and her father. They didn't choose this spotlight. I did. Let me carry that burden." Then he ended with something no one expected: the announcement of a new charitable fund in Raymond Carter's name, created to support cancer patients who couldn't afford treatment. A month later, spring had arrived, and the coastal breeze carried the soft scent of wildflowers. Sophie walked slowly along the stone path that led to the small chapel, where everything had begun. She wore a simple cream dress, her hair loosely tied back, a folded note clutched in her hand. "Saturday, 4 p.m., meet me at the chapel, not for the media, not for the name, just for you." When Sophie pushed open the familiar wooden door, Lucas was already there. Not in a tuxedo, not polished for appearances, just Lucas, in a white button-up shirt and that same warm smile that made her feel seen. He stepped toward her. "I didn't want our story to end in chaos. I want to start a new chapter right here where it all began." Sophie smiled, her eyes already misting. "And I told you I loved you, even if I was still afraid." Lucas took her hand gently. "I know. But if you're willing to walk this road with me, even slowly, even carefully, I won't let go." They sat together in the last pew, the same spot where Sophie once sought refuge from the world, now turned into the place where she chose to embrace it. And now, in that same place, she was choosing to open her heart. "I have a promise," Lucas whispered, pulling a small box from his pocket. "No grand proposal, no kneeling. Just two people in a sacred moment of truth. No matter what the world throws at us, I'll stay with you, for you." Sophie nodded, her tears falling freely. "I know." And this time, when Lucas reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. If this story touched your heart even just a little, don't forget to give it a like and share it with someone who believes in quiet beginnings and second chances. And tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything? I'd love to read your story. Until next time, stay kind.